Hi everyone! This is quite different from my usual content, but I have to talk about this, because being diagnosed with R-CPD has been a major revelation for me regarding my struggle with mental health and gastrointestinal issues. If you're a subscriber of mine, you probably clicked on this video because you have no idea what these two things are, and you're curious to know. Or you found this video by searching for it because you have the same problem. So let me either educate you or validate the shit out of you. For as long as I can remember, I've never been able to burp. The same is true for my brother and sister. We always thought it was just this quirky thing that ran in the family, even though our parents and other brother can burp like normal. My experience hasn't been exactly like my brother's or sister's, but there's definitely a lot of overlap. So what the hell is this condition? Well, it wasn't officially recognized in the medical literature until 2019. Before then, it was referred to as no burp syndrome. But it finally has a name, retrograde cricopharyngeal dysfunction, or R-CPD. This article from Columbia University describes it simply. In most people, a muscle in the throat relaxes briefly every time we swallow, allowing food and drink to flow into the esophagus. We don't feel it, it just happens. When we burp, the same muscle relaxes to let the air out. The rest of the time, this muscle, the cricopharyngeus, is contracted. In people with no burp syndrome, the cricopharyngeus muscle never relaxes for burping. Until recently, no burp syndrome sufferers who experience syndrome-induced social anxiety on top of pain were mistakenly diagnosed with conditions like acid reflux, irritable bowel syndrome, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Because of misdiagnosis, they never got relief because no treatment was successful. Primary symptoms include the inability to burp, obviously, gurgling sounds in the throat, uncomfortable pressure in the chest or neck, abdominal bloating that typically worsens throughout the day, and excessive flatulence. It's gotta come out somehow. Nearly every night after dinner, I look about 4 months pregnant, and I have to contort myself into various positions to relieve the trapped gas. Puppy pose and downward dog usually do the trick, but sometimes I gotta do some creative movement. Meanwhile, my husband is over here burping and farting with such ease. If you're thinking, well, I don't really burp, but I don't have these other symptoms, you're probably confusing burping with belching. Your body is releasing gas quietly throughout the day without much conscious effort. With R-CPD, gas is not getting released. It's staying in until it makes its way out the other end. Other common but not universal symptoms include painful hiccups. And when I say painful, I mean sharp pain, like my diaphragm is violently assaulting me. For me, these are infrequent, but what happens very frequently, like numerous times throughout the day, are what I call hiccuburps, which sound like hiccups, but they're not quite the same as regular hiccups, and they're obviously not burps. They typically happen after eating, drinking, or talking a lot, either once or in a sequence of 2 or 3. It's already happened like 3 times throughout recording this short little intro, so I'll insert the clip here. Really obnoxious. Worst of all though, many people with R-CPD report having difficulty vomiting and emetophobia, aka the fear of vomiting. This has been a major cause of my anxiety. Nausea is a fairly common symptom of anxiety, but nausea is my primary symptom. A panic attack for me is an intense nausea attack. I forgot to mention the obvious, which is that R-CPD often causes nausea in the first place. Nausea triggers my anxiety, the nausea gets worse, the anxiety intensifies, which triggers my emetophobia, which causes a panic attack. What led to my diagnosis was a traumatizing experience I had recently where I ate too much too fast. I was at my best friend's house. We had just done yoga and were about to watch the Phantom of the Opera, an otherwise relaxing environment. We made these mashed potato quesadillas, which sound kind of weird, but they were delicious and tasted like pierogies. To a normal person, it was a normal portion of food. But to me, it was a fairly large portion because I'm used to grazing throughout the day due to my situation. It was a pretty high-fat meal too, with a good amount of vegan butter and cheese and guacamole, and a peanut butter cup for dessert. As soon as I finished eating, the symptoms began. The gurgles in my throat, the bloating, the pressure in my chest. Being uncomfortably full will often trigger anxiety for me, so I started experiencing my typical anxiety symptoms: nausea, sweaty palms, and shakiness. I got up to poop like 3 times, and the 3rd time was diarrhea. Super fun. Even though I was doing the things to relieve my anxiety, like emptying my bowels, taking deep breaths, fanning myself, applying an ice pack to the back of my neck, nothing was working. The chest pressure and the gurgles and the hiccuburps got worse, and my legs were shaking violently from the intense fear that I might throw up this time. I was banging on my chest, which is something that I do to attempt to relieve the pressure, like I'm burping myself or something. So much so that the next day my sternum was literally sore. After 2 hours of this nonsense, my best friend offered to drive me home. Getting to the car was a struggle, and we had to pull over like multiple times because I was so deliriously nauseous that I thought I might actually throw up. Now, you might be thinking, bitch, just go throw up and you'll feel better. Listen, I would if I could. A few years ago, I scarfed down a whole plate of pad thai and downed a Thai iced tea, and my nausea got so extreme that I made the decision to face my fear and go throw up. I told myself, just close your eyes, get it over with, and you'll feel so much better. So I tried. I dry heaved over the toilet multiple times. Despite having a very full stomach, nothing came up. It seems like over the years, it's gotten harder and harder to throw up, both physically and mentally. If I manage to throw up at all, which I haven't in the past decade, it's like a quarter cup of fluid. That is not enough to relieve any physical discomfort, and it only traumatizes me more. So that's why I avoid it at all costs now. My sister and I have always bonded over our shared fear of throwing up. A year or so ago, I was talking with my sister, and I theorized that vomiting must be uniquely excruciating for us. Our husbands kind of shut down this theory, like, puking sucks, nobody likes puking. But we thought if it sucks so much for everyone, why are people so nonchalant about it? They told us our fears were psychological. I didn't really have evidence for my theory, so I figured they were right. It must just be anxiety. I've been in therapy for a year now, trying to figure out where my anxiety and emetophobia came from. My general anxiety has improved significantly, but I still occasionally get panic attacks. After that recent experience at my friend's house, I felt hopeless, like I'm doing everything right. I'm in therapy, I'm eating right, I'm exercising, I'm meditating, I'm doing yoga, I'm getting enough sleep. Why the hell am I experiencing such extreme distress from eating a relatively normal amount of food? There must be something physically wrong with me. My best friend is 5 feet tall and weighs like 90 pounds, and she ate the exact same portion I did and was fine, despite also struggling with anxiety. I must have IBS or something. So I started researching IBS, and I thought about trying a low FODMAP diet. But then I stumbled upon r/no-burp. I started reading articles and watching videos about R-CPD, and I've never felt so validated in my life. All the pieces fell into place when I heard this clip from Dr. Robert Bastian, the first person to diagnose and treat this condition.
Have you seen improvement in emetophobia? I actually should have mentioned that in the webinar. Emetophobia and sort of general anxiety are rampant in people with R-CPD. Why is that? I think it's because sort of average people, they just kind of live their lives. Somebody says, hey, let's go out for a burger, and they say sure, or whatever. A person with R-CPD, there's a constant calculation to life about, okay, what shall I eat, and what will I say if I start feeling uncomfortable and I have to just eat a quarter of my sandwich and leave the rest? How will I explain that? Or where will I go to release gas? It's just very stressful. It's very hard on social life, and emetophobia is quite big. We have a number of people who've actually had formal therapy for their emetophobia, and you say, well, why would that be? And speculation, as you can tell, I'm good at speculation. My speculation is that perhaps that person with R-CPD had an experience of inability to vomit. I don't think I mentioned that on the seminar either, that because you have to let the sphincter go to vomit, you can imagine that there are people with R-CPD who not only can't burp, but they can't vomit. Small subset can't vomit at all. Very large group have a hard time vomiting, meaning it's a heroic thing. It's an incredible Hulk kind of effort that's required. Well, if you take a little 2-year-old who gets a gastroenteritis and they heave and heave and heave, until they can't vomit, or it's this horrendous, effortful, painful thing. Well, that 2-year-old would understandably think of vomiting as an extraordinarily aversive thing. So that's my speculation about why is emetophobia so common. It's because it's really hard to vomit in the majority. The ones who can vomit pretty easily, pretty normally, are by the way much more likely to be air vomiters, where they gag themselves to air vomit in order to relieve symptoms. And of course, they're going to tend to not have emetophobia because emetophobics wouldn't ever do that.
I literally sobbed when I heard this. I was overwhelmed with emotions like self-compassion, relief, and elation that there's a cure. It was like my life makes sense now. I can very much relate to the anxiety around food in social settings. Like, I have to explain that I'm a grazer and I can't eat full meals in one sitting because I don't want people to think I'm anorexic. I always have to take half my food to go, which is extremely inconvenient sometimes. On top of that, it gives me environmental guilt if I forget to bring Tupperware. For a while, I suspected there was a connection between my inability to burp and my nausea, but I hadn't connected all the dots. And as I mentioned before, I had a theory that vomiting was worse for me than for others, but I didn't understand why. Vomiting is uniquely awful for me because my esophagus doesn't function properly. When I threw up as a kid, it required so much effort to get a little bit out, and it often came out my nose. Of course, vomiting is not fun for anyone, but it isn't as traumatizing if it comes up quickly and easily and offers you relief afterwards. I can't remember ever experiencing relief after vomiting like others describe. Only trauma. My sister has anxiety as well, but it hasn't manifested in quite the same way. She's terrified of throwing up, but she doesn't get panic attacks like I do. Instead, she gets severe stomach pain from the gas buildup. I personally haven't experienced the level of pain she's described. I more so just feel uncomfortable. But a few weeks ago, she described having pain so bad that she thought something might rupture inside of her. She made her husband drive to the store at like midnight to pick up Gas-X. My brother, on the other hand, just complains about the gurgles and farting a lot. He doesn't seem to have as big of an issue with vomiting. Apparently, R-CPD is on a spectrum. Some people burp occasionally by surprise, but they're unable to do so voluntarily. This may explain why not everyone with this condition experiences the same degree of difficulty throwing up. So you're probably wondering, what's the cure? It's a relatively simple procedure involving a Botox injection in your upper esophageal sphincter. You have to be put under general anesthesia so they can shove a tube down your throat, but no incision is made, so the recovery is fairly painless. 80% of people are cured for life after a single injection. Most people retain the ability to burp after the Botox has worn off because they've had 3 months of training. 20% of patients have to get a second or third injection. There is virtually no risk and minimal potential side effects like uncontrollable burping and difficulty swallowing in the first few weeks. Unfortunately, there aren't very many doctors who perform this procedure since it's such an underdiagnosed condition. Fortunately for me, I found an ENT specialist in my area who does, but many people have to travel. On top of potential travel costs, it's often an out-of-pocket expense as it's considered an elective procedure, because health insurance execs are ruthless capitalists. If your insurance does cover it, good luck finding a specialist in your area who's in-network. And because it requires general anesthesia, it can be pretty pricey, like around $4,000. The main reason I made this video was to raise awareness about this condition, so that one day treatment can be free and accessible for everyone. It should certainly be considered a medical necessity, since burping is an essential bodily function, and not being able to can be pretty freaking debilitating. My doctor suspects that it's actually not that rare because he treats people with this condition all the time. It's the lack of awareness keeping so many people from seeking treatment. If you think you have R-CPD, r/noburp is a fantastic resource as they've compiled a list of doctors who offer this treatment. I've linked it below. Lastly, please share this video or talk about this condition with people you know, because this treatment is apparently life-changing. My surgery is scheduled for May 5th, and I'm so freaking excited. I will definitely be celebrating my first ever burp with a glass of champagne. I'm also very curious to see if I gain weight, because overeating will no longer be so aversive to me. But I eat a pretty healthy diet, so I'm not too worried about it. If you've made it this far, thanks for listening to me vent about my disgusting bodily functions. And next time you burp, have some gratitude, because RCPD sufferers are extremely jealous. Alright, peace out.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them